Okay, let's unpack this. I've been married for over 30 years to a man who, well, by the standards of today's online dating gurus, he'd tick all the high-value boxes. You know, confident, successful, the kind of man they claim to represent. So the other day, just out of curiosity, I decided to run a little experiment. I explained this whole relationship polarity theory to him. You know the one, it's all over the internet. That for there to be passion, the man must be this dominant masculine energy, and the woman, she has to be a soft, submissive, feminine energy. I laid out the idea that, well, according to this logic, he should be fundamentally attracted to a woman who is his opposite, right? Someone who defers to him, doesn't challenge him. He listened patiently, really listened. And when I finished, he just told me flat out that he finds weak women boring and uninspiring. That the idea of being with someone who couldn't hold their own in a debate or who just passively agreed with everything, he said it sounded exhausting. And that's when it really clicked for me. If the very man these theories hold up as the ultimate prize doesn't even want the woman they're telling everyone to become, then who exactly is this advice for? And what is it really trying to achieve? Welcome to a deep dive that, well, hopefully cuts through some of the noise of dating advice to explore what actually builds strong, lasting connections. Today, we're dissecting some popular relationship theories, definitely challenging outdated stereotypes, and looking at how these huge real-world shifts in family structures and economics have fundamentally reshaped our partnerships. My mission today really is to uncover who this relationship polarity advice is genuinely serving and why it often feels so disconnected from what many people truly desire, what they find fulfilling in a partner.
What's truly fascinating here is how often narratives like relationship polarity, they're presented as these timeless universal truths. When in my research, I found they often reflect something else entirely. It's often a very specific and maybe even anxious pushback against genuine social progress, against evolving gender roles. We'll definitely connect this to the broader picture, looking at how historical economic changes have just fundamentally altered our relational landscape. It provides crucial context, often overlooked context, for understanding today's dynamics. And frankly, it helps explain why some of these theories feel like, well, like a horse and buggy trying to keep up with a rocket ship.
Yeah, exactly. And we've all encountered it, right? Whether you're scrolling through social media, listening to certain podcasts, or, stumbling upon self-help books, these online gurus pushing this idea of relationship polarity. It's pitched as this immutable law of attraction, suggesting men and women are fundamentally different, embodying these distinct masculine and feminine energies that must oppose. They have to polarize for passion to truly ignite and, thrive. On the surface, maybe it sounds romantic, like a dance of complementary forces. Or, depending on your perspective, it just sounds really, really old-fashioned.
Well, from a sociological and psychological standpoint, this concept, it's often labeled bro science. And not necessarily in a dismissive way, just to shut it down, but really to highlight its lack of solid empirical support. It relies so heavily on anecdotal, often, frankly, misogynistic interpretations of how people interact. It tends to reinforce these outdated gender stereotypes with startling rigidity. It paints men as inherently logical, analytical, dominant, naturally suited for leadership and power. While women, on the other hand, they're depicted as intrinsically soft, emotional, nurturing, agreeable. Their power is supposedly in their surrender, their deference. It's such a throwback, an echo of a bygone era that honestly just doesn't hold up to modern scrutiny or the lived experiences of, well, most people today. My observations definitely suggest it can make it incredibly difficult for individuals, particularly men who internalize these rigid frameworks, to truly accept and build authentic relationships with strong, confident women. Think about it.
If a man believes his masculinity requires the woman's deference, then a woman who asserts herself, makes independent decisions, maybe has strong capabilities, she can be perceived not as an equal partner, but as a threat to his prescribed masculine frame. And that dynamic, it just creates constant friction. It undermines genuine connection, respect, everything you need for a healthy relationship.
Right. And here's where it really hits home, because I heard this anecdote that just perfectly illustrates this disconnect. It speaks volumes about the reality versus the narrative. My phone screen glows, a tiny stage for a self-proclaimed alpha coach. He talks about polarity, about the masculine frame and the feminine essence. He says a woman's power is in her surrender, her softness. I look up from the screen at the law degree hanging on my wall that I fought for, at the keys to the apartment I pay for myself. I remember last week leading a tense negotiation, my voice steady and firm, not soft. I remember the thrill of it, the feeling of being powerful in my own right. They want me to be the calm, receiving harbor, but my soul has always been a ship built for the storm. The polarity they sell feels less like a natural law and more like a carefully constructed box, and I'm beginning to realize I have no interest in making myself small enough to fit.
Wow, that's powerful. And it resonates so deeply with my research, it just raises this critical question, doesn't it? If the very high-value individuals these theories claim to serve, and indeed the strong, capable women they're instructing others how to be, if these people don't actually desire the dynamic being promoted, then who exactly is this advice for? It certainly doesn't seem to be about fostering genuine relational success or, individual fulfillment. Instead, it really appears to be an attempt to police women, to subtly, or maybe not so subtly, push them back into a traditional, historically confined role. And not for their own benefit, right? But perhaps for someone else's comfort. Or maybe just to maintain a certain power dynamic that feels threatened. My findings consistently confirm that individuals, regardless of gender, often find weakness, passive agreement, or just a lack of personal agency. Well, they find it boring, uninspiring in a partner. We often crave a companion who can hold their own, offer robust contributions to discussions, challenge us intellectually, stand as an equal in life's journey. So the idea that a woman should diminish herself or adopt this persona of softness and submission just to attract a so-called high-value man, it runs directly counter to what many truly successful and confident individuals, both men and women, actually desire in a long-term thriving relationship. It feels less about building a healthy partnership and more about maybe maintaining a perception of male dominance, which ultimately just stifles the growth of both people involved.
So, okay, if the polarity narrative is, as you put it, bro science and pretty disconnected from what people truly desire, then what does actually make a relationship tick? What makes it last? We've all grown up with that rom-com narrative, right? Opposites attract. The brooding artist falls for the bubbly accountant. Their differences create fireworks. It's a compelling story, for sure. But is that really how enduring human connection works outside of Hollywood scripts? I've always kind of suspected that while a little difference can add spice, maybe too much just leads to constant friction, misunderstanding.
Your suspicion is spot on. It's precisely what the vast body of psychological and sociological research validates. My work, and the work of many others, it directly contrasts this pervasive yet scientifically unsupported romantic narrative of opposites attracting. The overwhelming evidence points consistently toward what we call the similarity attraction hypothesis. Put simply, the old adage rings true. Birds of a feather really do flock together. It's just a consistent finding across decades of research. People are drawn to, and more importantly, they stay with, those who share fundamental commonalities with them. The idea that profound differences inherently create irresistible, lasting passion. Well, it might make for dramatic storytelling, sure. But in the intricate day-to-day reality of human relationships, what often draws people together and keeps them there is a deep foundation of shared understanding, common ground, aligned values. And this isn't just, a casual observation from swiping on dating apps. It's a consistent, robust finding in how human connection is formed, how it's maintained, and how deeply satisfying partnerships are actually built.
So the science points definitively towards similarity, being alike, as a key driver of attraction and, crucially, long-term relationship success. And you're saying this isn't just about superficial stuff like sharing a love for pizza or the same band. It runs much deeper, touching on core aspects of who we are, how we see the world, how we operate.
Absolutely, much deeper. Our recent research has gone to great lengths to meticulously examine actual similarity between partners. We really try to move beyond just perceived similarity. That initial feeling that you click with someone, which can sometimes be misleading. We delve into a really wide range of factors, trying to quantify how alike partners truly are. This includes everything from, yes, daily habits and leisure interests, the small stuff matters too, but also much deeper aspects, like relationship preferences, how you prefer to give and receive affection, say, or how you approach conflict resolution. Very important. We also look at communication styles. Are you speaking a similar emotional language? Can you understand each other easily? And personality traits, specifically using the framework of the Big Five personality model. This covers openness to experience, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism, so core personality structures. Furthermore, we examine similarities in sexuality and, perhaps most fundamentally, core norms and values, what truly matters to you in life, your worldview, your ethics. We use an extensive questionnaire, actually, with over 300 questions, to try and provide a comprehensive, objective measure of these actual shared characteristics. So yeah, it goes far beyond just superficial commonalities. It's about the fundamental compatibility that really underpins a truly harmonious life together.
Okay, over 300 questions. That's thorough. And the findings. When you take this incredibly deep dive into actual similarity across so many dimensions, does it truly make a difference? Is it reflected in how satisfied couples say they are in their relationships? Or is it just maybe a fleeting initial spark, something that fades over time?
Oh, it makes a profound difference. A huge difference. My analysis reveals a significant and really robust positive relationship.
The more similar partners are across these different dimensions, the higher their reported relationship satisfaction. Consistently. And this isn't merely important at the intoxicating beginning of a relationship, you have the honeymoon phase. In fact, the homogeneity between partners, that deep shared ground, turns out to be the most powerful predictor of marital stability over time. That's huge. What we're consistently seeing is that shared characteristics, from maybe mundane preferences like tidiness, all the way to profound alignment on life goals, they just create a smoother, more harmonious path for couples. It inherently reduces points of friction, potential misunderstandings, while at the same time it increases mutual understanding and empathy. You just get each other more easily. And this forms a remarkably robust base that contributes significantly to a lasting, fulfilling bond. It makes the journey through life together, well, far less turbulent.
That's fascinating. So similarity isn't just for the honeymoon phase, when everything feels new and exciting. It's actually the bedrock for the long haul. It solidifies the relationship as the years go by. But what happens then as relationships mature? As they face the inevitable challenges of life, the stresses, the changes, just the simple passage of time, does similarity continue to hold its weight, or does that initial shine eventually wear off?
This is where the research gets particularly interesting, I think. While my findings, and they're consistent with broader literature, do indicate that overall relationship satisfaction tends to, well, decrease slightly as a relationship gets longer.
Which sounds kind of depressing, but maybe realistic.
Yeah, it's perhaps a natural consequence of familiarity, life's inevitable stressors, maybe the fading of that initial novelty. It happens. But, and this is the key point, partner similarity plays an absolutely crucial moderating role in this.
Yeah.
The positive effect of similarity on relationship satisfaction actually becomes stronger in long-term relationships.
Stronger, not weaker.
Stronger. Exactly. This suggests that similarity isn't just a launchpad for the relationship. It's a critical, ongoing variable that actively helps prevent the typical reduction of satisfaction that can occur over time. Think of it like a shared operating system for life. When life throws a curveball, maybe a job loss, a family crisis, a health issue, if you and your partner share similar ways of processing stress, similar coping mechanisms, or similar core values about perseverance, maybe, you're far more likely to approach that challenge as a cohesive team. You're speaking the same emotional and logistical language. This deep alignment reduces friction during difficult times, and it builds a stronger sense of shared resilience, shared understanding, which is precisely what actively combats that natural dip in satisfaction over the years. It's protective.
Wow. So a similar partner doesn't just make you happy initially, they actually help you stay happy through the decades. Actively combating that natural decline in satisfaction, that truly is an aha moment for anyone thinking about long-term partnership, isn't it? It means that having deeply shared common ground in habits, fundamental values, even those subtle personality traits becomes increasingly vital over time. It's less about the initial fireworks, maybe, and more about building a sturdy, comfortable, adaptable home together, brick by shared brick, through all of life's seasons.
Precisely. And this has really significant implications, both for people in relationships and for those looking. For long-term couples, it implies that actively focusing on and appreciating their shared ground, their common ground, can be a powerful and effective strategy, a way to not only maintain but potentially even boost their satisfaction. It's about consciously nurturing those similarities that provide stability and joy, remembering why you clicked in the first place. And for singles, well, it suggests maybe shifting their focus away from chasing a magnetic opposite or some idealized alpha figure, and towards actively searching for partners in contexts where they naturally share interests, hobbies, or values, places where you're likely to find people already like you in important ways. That inherent, authentic similarity could be a far more significant predictor of future happiness and enduring partnership than any fleeting spark of polarity. It really reframes the search for a partner towards something more grounded, more realistic, and ultimately potentially much more fulfilling.
Okay, let's pivot slightly then. Because these discussions about polarity and traditional roles, they so often reference an idealized past, usually painting this vivid picture of the American 1950s. We've all seen the images, right? The picture-perfect suburban home, the smiling husband heading off to work in his hat, the apron-clad wife waving from the doorway. But was that male provider, female homemaker ideal ever truly universal? Or is it more of a pervasive, maybe nostalgic myth that kind of ignores centuries of complex history?
Well, it's absolutely more of a nostalgic myth, and a very recent one at that. When we actually look at the broader historical sweep of American family structures over centuries, it's a blip, really. For most of the 19th century, what predominated were what historians call corporate families, end quote one. This largely meant self-employed households, overwhelmingly farms, where all family members contributed labor directly to the family's economic survival. Everyone worked. Production was a comprehensive family affair. You had grandparents, parents, children, often all living under the same roof, all contributing to the farm or the family business. The idea of a man going off to a factory while a woman stayed home entirely, completely detached from the family's productive enterprise. That was far from the norm for the vast majority of people during this long period. Women were absolutely integral to the farm's operation, managing household production, processing food, making clothes, often selling surplus goods at market. Their economic contribution was undeniable. Even if it often wasn't paid in cash wages, it was vital labor.
So the shift towards men as the sole breadwinners, that whole concept was actually a relatively recent, and you're saying somewhat brief, development in the grand scheme of American history. It wasn't some ancient eternal tradition passed down through generations.
Exactly, not at all. The rise of the male breadwinner family model really only began in the early 20th century, and it was largely driven by the expansion of wage labor opportunities for men, specifically in these burgeoning factories, mines, other industrial sectors, new kinds of work outside the home. This structure, where the husband worked for wages outside the home and the wife managed the domestic sphere, it peaked around 1940. At that point, it represented about 57% of marriages. So a majority, but far from universal even then. But crucially, it only truly predominated for a pretty fleeting period, maybe 4 decades, roughly from 1920 to 1960. Now, it did empower young men in a certain way. It gave them economic independence to leave the family farm, maybe marry earlier, so they no longer had to wait to inherit land or a business. However, paradoxically, it did very little to empower women. In fact, it often solidified their economic dependence on their husbands. It kept them largely under patriarchal control, maybe even more so than before in some ways. Their work in the home, though still vital, was often devalued precisely because it wasn't paid wage labor. And this reinforced a narrative of male economic superiority that maybe hadn't existed in quite the same way during the corporate family era, where everyone's contribution was more visible.
Okay, and then came the post-World War II era, that golden age that gets so heavily romanticized as the absolute height of the traditional family. But you're saying even then, things were already changing rapidly for women, setting the stage for even bigger, more transformative shifts that would fundamentally alter relationships forever.
Indeed. The mid-20th century, even with its, veneer of traditionalism, saw the irreversible emergence of dual-earner families. It was already happening. It's really important to remember that before the 1950s, many employers actively practiced what were called marriage bars.
Marriage bars, what were those?
They were actual company policies that explicitly prohibited hiring married women, or even required women to resign if they got married.
Seriously? That was legal?
Oh, yeah. The reasoning was often based on the notion that married women should be at home, supported by their husbands, or that a man's job should always take precedence if jobs were scarce. However, the extraordinary labor demand unleashed by World War II, pulling millions of men away and needing production ramped up, combined with the huge post-war marriage boom, which significantly reduced the supply of single women available for the workforce. Well, it forced employers to drop these discriminatory barriers. They needed workers. As a result, married women's labor force participation just rose sharply, dramatically from the 1950s onward. This fundamentally altered the family economy and slowly but surely chipped away at that male breadwinner ideal. This wasn't a small change. It was a societal earthquake, really. A significant and ever-growing wave of women entering the paid workforce with profound ripple effects that we're still feeling today.
So what did this actually mean for family dynamics, for the power balance within relationships? Because if the woman is also bringing home a paycheck, that fundamentally shifts more than just the household income, right? It has to be about a monumental shift in economic leverage, personal agency.
Precisely. You've hit the nail on the head. The rise of female wage labor directly and profoundly undermined the economic underpinnings of traditional male patriarchal authority within the family. We see a strong, very consistent historical association between the increasing availability of jobs for women and rising rates of divorce and separation, especially from the late 19th century right through the late 20th. Economic independence provided women a critical means of escape from unhappy or even abusive marriages, something that was far, far less feasible when they were entirely financially dependent on their husbands. It also gave them the power, the option, to delay marriage or even forego it altogether if they chose. This gave them unprecedented control over their life trajectories. They no longer had to stay in a marriage solely out of financial necessity. That was revolutionary. It fundamentally shifted their options and their ability to negotiate within relationships. This economic power translated directly into greater voice, greater autonomy, and a real challenge to those traditional gender hierarchies in the home. Money talks, as they say.
Wow. It sounds like society's attitudes then had a lot of catching up to do with this new economic reality, creating this fascinating period of social and psychological adjustment, almost like a slow motion cultural whiplash as people tried to reconcile old beliefs with new behaviors.
They absolutely did. It took time. Consider this statistic. In 1970, nearly half, almost 50% of all wives were in the workforce, earning money. Yet in that same year, less than 20% of those working wives actually approved of married women working outside the home.
That's incredible cognitive dissonance.
It's a classic textbook example. Their behavior, often driven by economic necessity or emerging opportunities, was way out ahead of their expressed beliefs, which were still shaped by older norms. But as more and more married women entered the paid workforce throughout the 70s and 80s, the stigma surrounding it rapidly faded. Familiarity breeds acceptance, right? By 1980, the majority of married women approved of it. And by the year 2000, that number had soared to 80%. A huge shift in just a couple of decades. So this isn't really a story about shifting attitudes causing the economic change. It's more about attitudes adjusting to profound economic realities that had already taken hold, which then in turn allowed for and accelerated further institutional changes. Things like the loosening of divorce laws, making it easier to leave bad marriages, greater control over reproductive choices, giving women more say over family size and timing, and even a symbolic but really significant change by the U.S. Census Bureau. In 1980, they changed their household head designation from being exclusively male by default to a gender-neutral householder. It was a clear, undeniable sign that the old order was dissolving, and a new, more egalitarian family structure was taking root, reflecting economic shifts that were already well underway.
Okay, so we've tracked this incredible journey from communal farm families to the rise and relatively short reign of the male breadwinner model, and then to the widespread emergence of dual-earner households. Now let's zoom in on just the past few decades, because there's been another profound economic shift impacting relationships, one that challenges those old ideals even further, making the two-income household not just common, but for many, many people, absolutely necessary for basic economic survival.
You're hitting on such a crucial point for understanding relationships today. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the significant decline of marriage rates in the U.S. since the 1960s, particularly among working class and middle class individuals, it can be largely attributed to something quite stark. The deteriorating economic circumstances of young men, combined with pretty stagnating wages for young women as well. It's a fundamental economic underpinning that has reshaped relationship patterns. It pushes back dramatically against those romanticized notions of the past, making the single income provider model an increasingly difficult, if not frankly impossible, aspiration for a huge number of people.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting and honestly quite sobering when you look at the actual numbers. Median wages for young men aged 25, 29, right? If we look at them in constant dollars, so adjusted for inflation to give us a real picture of their purchasing power, those wages more than doubled after World War II, a huge boom. They reached an impressive peak back in 1973 at about $48,500 for full-time workers, 48.5. Okay? But after that peak in 73, they've seen a dramatic, sustained decline, dropping a staggering 26% by 2013, down to just $36,000. And that's for full-time workers. If you consider all young men in that age group, including part-time or unemployed, the median wage declined an astonishing 44% from its 1973 peak. It plummeted to just $23,000 in 2013.
$23,000?
Yeah. This is an unprecedented, sustained decline in U.S. history. We haven't seen anything like it on this scale, not even during the depths of the Great Depression. It's a silent economic crisis for a whole generation, really.
It absolutely is. And this seismic economic shift, it has just fundamentally altered the landscape for young adults. It's reshaped their opportunities, their expectations for marriage, for family formation, everything. That long-held American ideal, that young men would automatically earn more than their fathers did, that was dramatically reversed, completely flipped on its head. By 2013, young men were consistently earning significantly less than their fathers did at the same age. It represents a generational relative income drop of about 80% since 1958. Just think about that. This relentless economic pressure is a major, undeniable factor in the consistent rise of the average marriage age we see, in the overall retreat from marriage among younger groups, in the rise of cohabitation instead of marriage. When economic stability becomes a much more distant, maybe even elusive, prospect for so many,
The traditional steps towards partnership just become far more challenging to achieve. That golden age of wage labor for young men, the one that sort of formed the economic backdrop for those earlier family ideals, it simply doesn't exist anymore for a vast segment of the population. It leaves many navigating a new, much more financially precarious reality.
Right. So the 1950s provider model, even when it was briefly idealized, had an economic underpinning, a reality of rising male wages that simply doesn't exist for most people today. Which means the question isn't really, should we have two incomes anymore? It's more like, what does this mean for the future of the dual income household model? Does it remain a choice, or has it become something else entirely?
For most couples today, it's clear. Two incomes are not merely a preference or just a way to afford luxuries. They've become an absolute necessity for economic survival, for maintaining even a basic middle-class quality of life. My observations and the broader data show that about 74% of mothers are now in the labor force. That's 3/4. And that figure is driven by both personal choice and overwhelming economic necessity. Furthermore, look at earnings within couples. A significant portion of women, maybe around 30%, now earn roughly the same as their male partners. And about 20%, 1 in 5, actually earn more than their male partners.
So the woman is the primary breadwinner in 1 out of 5 couples.
Roughly, yes. This reality is constantly reinforced when you talk to people managing their finances today. So many individuals I speak with, they highlight that two incomes provide crucial security. Security against economic shocks like layoffs, unexpected medical bills. Life happens, right? It enables them to save for long-term goals, a down payment on a home, sending children to college, retirement, things that are incredibly hard on one income. And ultimately, it just offers a far higher standard of living, maybe a greater sense of peace of mind, than is often possible on a single income in today's economy. The days of a comfortable middle-class life on one average salary are, for most people, a relic of the past.
That shift you mentioned from choice to absolute necessity for dual incomes, that feels profound. And it seems like this trend isn't slowing down either. In fact, with rapid advancements in technology, particularly automation, the job market could change even more dramatically, right? Making even dual incomes potentially more challenging or just changing the nature of work entirely.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And we're already seeing it. Automation is fundamentally transforming the labor market. It's impacting not just manufacturing anymore, but increasingly service sectors too. White-collar jobs. Consider manufacturing employment in the U.S. It fell a staggering 37% between 1979 and 2015. 37%, even while the actual output from those industries doubled because of technological advancements in automation. Fewer people, more stuff. Looking ahead, experts estimate that nearly half, almost 50% of all U.S. jobs are at high risk of automation in the coming decades, with another fifth, maybe 20% at moderate risk.
That's huge. That's most jobs.
It points to a future where traditional wage labor itself, as we've known it for centuries, might become significantly less common for large segments of the population. We don't know what replaces it yet. If current trends continue and maybe even accelerate, male wage work, which peaked historically around 1970, could potentially fall to as low as 44% by 2050. And female wage work, which peaked later, around 2000, could follow a similar downward trajectory. This represents a massive, unprecedented shift away from centuries where wage labor was the growing norm, the expected path. It forces us to entirely rethink the economic foundations of relationships, of family, of society. It makes that old provider model seem not just outdated, but potentially completely unviable, irrelevant for an entire society facing these changes.
Okay. So given these massive, ongoing, and potentially accelerating economic and social transformations, how on earth does this relationship polarity concept fit in? Or does it fit in? It feels less like a helpful guide for modern relationships and more like, a desperate attempt to rewind the clock, to cling to a fictional past. It really is like trying to navigate a complex SpaceX rocket launch using a horse and buggy and a very, very old map. It just doesn't compute.
It's exactly that. You phrased it perfectly. It's a knee-jerk reaction to a changing world, as some have put it. It seems driven by a deep discomfort with evolving gender dynamics, maybe in nostalgia, a yearning for a simpler, though largely mythical, past. These theories desperately cling to those 1950s narratives that, as we've explored in detail, were never truly universal, they weren't stable, and they certainly weren't equitable in the first place. Take the idea of the male protector and provider as the foundational reason for male dominance in a relationship. It's largely a patriarchal fantasy. It fundamentally ignores historical realities. Women have always contributed to providing, whether through direct labor on farms, managing complex household economies, entering early factories, or joining the formal workforce in massive numbers later on. Always. And tragically, when it comes to protection, My analysis and broader criminological data consistently shows that, far from being the primary source of protection, a woman is statistically most likely to experience violence or harm from the very man she lives with. So this concept of male protection often masks, perhaps unintentionally sometimes, but often masks, a thinly veiled desire for control. Not genuine safety or partnership. It's really about maintaining a hierarchical power structure, not fostering mutual well-being or respect.
Yeah. It's almost as if the discomfort with women gaining equality, gaining autonomy, leads to these sometimes subtle, sometimes not so subtle, attempts to reimpose control, even in insidious ways. I'm thinking about those situations you sometimes hear about where a man might say something like, "She's not dressing in a way that is respectful of our relationship," as if her clothing choices are somehow about him or reflect on him, or worse, imply that her body is somehow his property to dictate rules for.
That's a classic and frankly chilling example of what's now widely recognized as coercive control, which is in fact illegal in some places now, like the UK and other countries. It's seen as a serious form of domestic abuse.
Coercive control, okay.
Yeah, it's a pervasive pattern of behaviors designed to dominate and control a partner, often not through overt physical violence, but through things like isolation, financial manipulation, intimidation, constant monitoring, humiliation, and yes, dictating what they can wear. It strips away a person's autonomy piece by piece. The specific demand about dressing respectfully for the relationship, it stems directly from what feminist theory calls the male gaze. That pervasive, often unconscious idea that women's bodies, their appearance, their choices are primarily for male consumption, judgment, and approval. In reality, as most women will tell you, they dress for self-expression, for comfort, for confidence, for their own personal autonomy, not primarily to entice others or seek male attention. So, attempting to control a partner's appearance based on an insecure assumption that their choices are fundamentally about male attention or disrespecting the relationship. It's profoundly disrespectful to that partner's individuality, their agency, their basic right to bodily autonomy. It's really a projection of deep-seated insecurity and a desire for control, not an act of respect or love, not even close.
So, okay, let's try and bring it all together then. The entire premise of these polarity theories, that men and women are these diametrically opposed energies, and that women specifically need to tone it down, become more submissive, smaller somehow, to attract a quality man. It's not only completely unscientific, completely devoid of real-world evidence supporting long-term happiness, but it actually actively harms modern relationships. It does that by promoting these outdated, economically unviable, and frankly psychologically damaging power imbalances. It sounds less like a blueprint for a thriving partnership and much more like a recipe for a truly miserable, inauthentic, and ultimately resentful one for everyone involved.
That's precisely the conclusion. My research, and the research of many others in sociology and psychology, consistently points to. Absolutely. When we step back and look at the actual evidence, look at what makes relationships work in the real world today, it becomes crystal clear that genuine gender equality actually strengthens relationships exponentially. It fosters partnerships built on mutual respect, on a shared vision for the future, and on complementary strengths where both individuals are empowered to bring their whole authentic selves to the table, not just parts of themselves. And those kinds of relationships are far more resilient. They're better equipped to handle today's complex economic realities, the inevitable challenges life throws at everyone. The emphasis shifts away from invented differences and rigid hierarchies, and towards shared values, common goals, deep, authentic similarities, connection. That, in my view, based on everything we know, is the real recipe for long-term satisfaction, for a truly thriving partnership. Building together, growing together, and celebrating each other's full humanity, not demanding one partner diminish themselves for the comfort or the illusion of control of the other.
Wow, we've certainly navigated some complex waters today. Looking at relationship theories, taking that deep dive into historical shifts, wrestling with the profound impact of economic realities on our most intimate connections, it seems abundantly clear, doesn't it, that the path to a fulfilling, resilient partnership isn't found in trying to adhere to rigid, outdated stereotypes, or in trying to fit yourself into some kind of meticulously constructed box designed by someone else. Instead, it really lies in understanding and adapting and in valuing genuine connection, shared purpose, and deep mutual respect. What a wild and I think incredibly illuminating deep dive this has been.
It really has. And if we connect this all back to the bigger picture one last time, it becomes overwhelmingly evident, I think. Embracing modern realities where both partners contribute in myriad ways, share a life vision, support each other's growth. This isn't just some progressive ideal anymore. It's practically essential. It's essential for building resilient, joyful, and truly authentic relationships in our increasingly complex and dynamic world. The future of relationships, as I see it, the ones that will truly flourish. They'll be built on an appreciation for shared strength, for mutual growth, and for true partnership of equals. Not on the nostalgic, often inaccurate echoes of a past that, for most people, never truly was.